So now we can put the zip into our ball gown. Because the ball gown that I was making is black, it's a little bit hard to see what I'm doing when I'm putting the zip on, and you guys might need to see more of the details. So I'm just going to put a zip in this dress to show you how, and it's basically the same technique for making the ball gown. So the first thing you need to do is get somebody to help you to fit the dress. So you need to put it on and just get them to mark out where you want the zip to be. So same as when we fit the Calico fabric, you're just pulling it tight and pinning it all the way down, and then when you take it off, you can leave pins in one side to mark where you want it to be done up, or you can make a pencil line if you want, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to make a little pencil line in here because I find it a little bit easier. You might want to do it with chalk or something so that it's easier to take off afterwards. So I want to make sure I've got a 1.5 seam allowance when I'm sewing my zip on. So I'm just going to measure 1.5 from that line. I'm going to draw myself another line. Because my skirt is a little bit uneven, I'm just going to figure out, so I've drawn this second line here, now I'm going to figure out what the distance is from the edge of the skirt to that point. So I've got 2.5 centimetres, so now I can move on to my skirt and mark 2.5 centimetres from the edge. I only need to go about as far as the length of my zip. So there's my zip, and I've gone pretty much far enough, so I'll do maybe just one more. And now we can pin both of the sides together and we'll cut along that line. My chiffon doesn't line up perfectly, so I'm not going to pull it over, I'm going to leave it sitting straight, and when I cut it, that'll even everything up. So now I'm going to cut down the seam allowance line, so that's the one closest to the edge, not the one where we want the zip to actually sit. So now that I've made sure both of my sides are perfectly even, I can go ahead and put my zip in, knowing that it's going to be sitting right in the centre of my back and not being pulled over to one side. So when I put the zip in, I want to leave the lining out so that I can fold the lining over the inside of the zip once I've finished sewing with the outside. So now I'm going to unpick to just about where the line is where I want my zip to sit, and then I'll show you how to pin the zip on. Normally I would overlock this seam so that it looks nice, because this dress doesn't have a lining on the skirt, but I ran out of white overlocking threads. We'll just unpick along here. Same thing up the top, just to where the line is. So now we'll get our zip. I'm using an invisible zip. I think invisible zips look the nicest because you don't have this big chunky thing running down your back. Also, it's good if you can't find exactly the same colour. It's not going to matter so much because it's going to be a little bit hidden within your fabric. So what I like to do to figure out what size zip I need is I just hold it, hold a tape measure on my back where the top of the bodice would finish, and then I'll basically run the tape measure down to the centre of my bottom, and that's the measurement that I'll need for my zip. If you're not sure, go with a longer zip, and you can always shorten it if you need to. If you want to shorten it, you would basically just unzip it a bit, and you would just stitch that down like that so that the zip can't go any higher, and then you would chop off that excess. So that's how you would shorten the zip. For my lace bodice, I've chosen to only do the zip to the top of where the satin bodice finishes, and then I've got my lace overlay over that. I'm not going to put the zip all the way up there. So you need to decide whether or not you want your zip to go all the way to the top or just to the top of the actual bodice. I'm going to put a button at the top of my lace overlay and cut like a little sort of a football shape, like a semicircle but with pointed ends on it out of the back, so that I've got a bit of my back showing through, so it's not going to be zipped up all the way. Okay, so to put the zip on, it's a little bit different to normal zips. Usually you'll see this thing on the front of the zip, but on an invisible zip it looks completely flat. The best way to tell is just what side this little thing is on that you can grab to open it. So whenever we're working with fabrics, we always put right side together. It's the same when you're working with a zip. We want to work with right sides together. So this is our good side, which means it's going to be facing down against the good side of the fabric. So I always like to start by just lining up the top little hooky bit with my line here and sitting that right on top of the fabric. Don't worry about these things that overlap. It's just this bit you need to worry about, making sure that sits right at the top. If you wanted to, after, you could put a hook and eye on just to make your fabric stay together a little bit better. So we'll start by lining that up, and then I'm going to put pins at the side closest to where the fabric is cut. So as you're pinning, make sure you're only going through the top layer of your fabric. Don't go through your lining as well. If you had a cotton lining that was covering your inner seam on your skirt, you would leave that lining out as well. This isn't lining, this is just a layer underneath my chiffon, so I'm going to include that in this. You need to make sure your zip sits perfectly straight with no kinks or bubbles, because that will make the back of your fabric twist. Your zip should be nice and parallel with the edge of your fabric. If you cut your fabric wonky, you probably need to straighten it up a little bit. So just to recap, I've left my lining undone and I've only pinned it to the top layer. Now we can unzip it. And we're just going to stitch down this side and we'll do the other side afterwards. So when we're sewing an invisible zip, we need to roll the zip out. If you have a play around with it, you'll notice that you can pull it open. So we're going to roll it and sew as close as we can inside there. I just use a zipper foot. You can get special invisible zip feet for your sewing machine that clip on and will actually roll it out for you. So just to help you see a little bit, I've zoomed in. We can roll this zip out. And we're going to be stitching in here. Okay, so we're going to go all the way from the top, all the way down to the bottom. You'll find this might get in your way a bit, so you can always move it along the zip if it's in your way. You won't be able to roll it down the bottom, so you just have to stitch as close as you can. I find it easier to do one stitch sort of not close to the edge first, just to hold it in position, and then I can take all my pins out, and then once it's secured, then I come back and do the close one. The closer you do it, the nicer your fabric will roll over the top. If you don't do it too close, your fabric might sit back like that, Do it really nice and close. Your fabric should just roll over the top. So now that we've sewn one side of the zip, what we need to do is zip it back up and then we can attach the other side. So we're going to fold it so that the good side is on the inside. And I'm just going to make sure my fabric is lined up at the top, so I don't want it to be higher or lower than the other side. So lining it up and placing it against the zip, and then we'll pin that all the way down there, and then we can unzip it to stitch that side down. Again, make sure you are not sewing the lining, so we'll have to unpick that as well. So now let's go and do the same thing on that side. Again, not sewing the line. Okay, so now that you've finished sewing your zip on, you might just want to do it up and make sure that it's zipping up perfectly, and then trim back any loose threads that you've got along the edge of that zip, because if you get any threads caught in that zip, it may stop it from going all the way up. So just trim back anything you've got there. And now we're going to fold our lining over this seam. So there's our zip from the front of the fabric. We've got this seam where we've sewn the zip in, so it should be sitting back like that. And then we're going to fold the lining over the top of that so that this doesn't always want to fold back out again. So we've already unpicked the top and the bottom of the lining. Your ball dress should have skirt lining as well. So what we want to do is basically fold this seam inwards, fold this flappy bit we've got at the top down, and then take this lining and fold it over the top of that zip. And you're going to pin it just a little distance from the edge of the zip. So you've got to fold everything under. Now we're basically just going to stitch that down. We are going to hand stitch this because we don't want our stitches to show on the other side. So when we're hand stitching, we're basically just catching the edge of the zip, but we're not going through to the other side of the fabric, so we're only catching this seam allowance that we've got here. So that's going to take quite a bit of time. I'm going to pin all this down and then I will stitch it, and then after that I will show you how to sew the centre back seam so that it's not open at the back underneath the zip. So for your skirt, you don't have to pin it to the zip if you don't want to. You could just have it loose so it would be separate and just fold the edge over and stitch it. Or you can pin it all the way along the zip, it doesn't really matter. So you can see that looks a lot nicer and neater on the inside now that I've pinned that lining down, in comparison to if I had just left it like that on the inside. So we've covered that with our lining. So for the centre back seam, you want to have your dress turned inside out, and you're going to basically be working from just next to the end of the zip here. So there's the zip from the inside of my dress, and we're going to be starting stitching from just next to the zip. So what I always like to do is I just fold the fabric so that the zip is together, and then I just pop a pin next to the zip, and that's where I'm going to start sewing from. We start sewing just above where the zip finishes. That will mean that we don't have any holes in the back. So just above where the zip finishes. You can see that's where my zip finishes, so I'll probably start sewing from about where the pin goes in there. What I'm going to do is stitch my lining first and my chiffon afterwards. So I'm going to get all my chiffon and tuck that out of the way, and just have my lining together. So the chiffon is all tucked up inside. As I start sewing, because the chiffon is part of the zip, it's going to catch a little bit of the chiffon. That's okay, because we can just snip the little bit that it's caught off later. So I've tucked my chiffon right up like that, way out of the way as far as I can get it. So what I'm going to do now is stitch from where my pin goes in all the way down this centre back seam. Then I'll open it up, snip the bit that's been caught on the right hand side of the seam, so the edge that is already cut, we're snipping on that edge, not past the seam. And then we'll do the same for the chiffon, but we'll start sewing in here. We'll start sewing here and we'll go all the way down. I always use a zipper foot to start with because it means I can get nice and close to this pin, and then once I sort of get past the zip, then I can just put a normal foot on and keep sewing all the way down. So zipper foot to start, just so you can get nice and close, and then whatever for the rest of the way. So now that you've finished putting your zip in your dress and it's pretty much all ready to go, you've done up your back seam, it's ready to wear, the last thing we need to do, there's my cat, last thing we need to do is hem the dress. So normally you would want to get the person who is going to be wearing the dress to put it on, get them to wear their heels or whatever shoes they're planning on wearing with the skirt so that it's at the correct height, and then get them to maybe hold up your top layer so that you can just see what you're doing and just work with one layer at a time. For your lining, you probably want that to be a little bit shorter than your overlayers, just because you don't want it sticking out the bottom and looking yucky. So once the person has got it on, make sure they are looking straight ahead. If they look down at the floor and watch what you're doing, basically they're going to lean forward a little bit and the dress is going to come down at the front, and then when you put all your pins in, you hem it, then they'll try it on, they'll look up and it'll actually be sitting off the floor like that. So you need to make sure that the person is facing straight ahead, looking up as you are hemming it for them. I prefer to just start by sort of pulling the dress out so that it's sort of sitting out at a slight angle, so not straight against their toes, a slight angle, and then I just put pins where it touches the floor. So I just work my way around, placing pins where it touches the floor. And I would just get the person to turn for me as I'm working, making sure I'm spreading it out evenly as I go. So you don't want to pull this over here and put a pin in it, because you can see that that actually sits up off the floor. You need it to be coming out where it would naturally want to sit. So you would go all the way around, and then you can either overlock it if you've got an overlocker. You might just want to fold it up twice. You could iron it and then stitch it down. For this sort of chiffon-y stuff, you can use a rolled hem on an overlocker. Doesn't really matter how you hem it, so long as you're just getting it to the right length. So when you take it off the person, I like to lay the dress down with the side seams touching, so I'll get the side seams meeting together and I'll have it folded in half. And I'll just check that my pins are the same measurement from the base pretty much all the way around. Obviously, if your fabric was cut wonky, there's going to be some bits where it's going to be longer. So you just need to sort of play it by eye and do what you think is best. And if you fold it in half, you can sort of feel the pins on the other side of the fabric, and if you can feel that they're lining up on both sides, then you know your dress is pretty even from left to right. And then you just do the same on every single layer, and once you've done that, your dress is finished.